MK, just go back to that screen. That's not available. Make a duplicate slide and give us a particular another laptop. Sorry.
Okay, I'll start now. Yeah. Okay, good evening, everyone. I am Deepak Yadav, Program Lead at CEEW, and I welcome you all to our webinar on how can India accelerate the implementation of the National Green Hydrogen Mission, assessment of standards to enable the ecosystem. And now in terms of agenda, we'll have a keynote address by Dr. Prasad Chafekar, Deputy Secretary, MNRE. This will be followed by a brief presentation by my colleague, Pratik Shripati on hydrogen standards in India. The presentation will then be followed by a panel discussion where we have experts to deliberate on the hydrogen standards, not only in India, but also globally. Can we check if Dr. Chafekar has joined?
Yeah, I've joined.
Yes. Okay, so I would now like to introduce Dr. Prasad Chafekar, who will be delivering the keynote address. Dr. Chafekar is the Deputy Secretary at the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy and looks after the green hydrogen portfolio. Before joining MNRE, since 2012, Dr. Chafekar was working in the Indian Revenue Services after clearing the prestigious civil service examination conducted by UPSC. Dr. Chafekar has a bachelor's degree in electronics and telecommunication engineering, a master's in laser technology from IIT Kanpur, and a PhD in electrical engineering from IIT Bombay. Over to you, Dr. Chafekar, for your keynote address.
Thank you so much, Deepak. This topic, which you have suggested today, is a little bit too technical even for me. We as a ministry, we have, as part of the mission, if you read the mission document, there is a timeline set in the mission that all standards which are required, especially for the transport point of view and other standards as well, they have to be notified within 12 months of the mission being declared. So the deadline would be around December, which looks a bit tough because standards always keep on evolving. But I just appraise the work which was done on this issue in MNRE on the work issue of standards. So there were 3 different working groups which were set up for RCS purpose, regulations, codes, and standards. I think even you were a part of one, I guess. CEEW, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll just brief everyone about the 3 groups. So the subgroup 1 was about the production and use of green hydrogen. Subgroup 2 was storage and transportation of hydrogen. And subgroup 3 was mobility applications using hydrogen. So these 3, the working group, these groups were chaired by the Secretary MNRE, and we had a wide participation from MOPNG, MORTH, DPIIT, SIAM, ARAI, everybody. So these subgroups, they met, I think, for 6 times, if I'm not wrong, in 6 months.
Yes.
And they gave a very comprehensive recommendations. There were close to 100 recommendations were made by taking into account various scenarios. The recommendations were structured like this. We had asked the subgroups to give them the standards in order of priority. So which standards they want to be adopted first, which are the very basic and very crucial for adoption. Even among those, there was we had done some categories. The first category was standards which are especially ISO standards, which could be just taken and applied or adopted by India directly with no modification required, because they're already extensively tested and debated all over the world, like ISO standards, for example. So in that, for that respect, the process in India is very simple, although not very short, but it's much simpler. BIS or PESO or any other organization, they have to give a minimum 3-month period for notice period for anyone to comment upon the proposed standard, and then they can be adopted as it is by ISO. Now, so this was the first category. Second category of standards were standards exist in for some specific countries or continents like America or EU, which had to be adapted to Indian conditions. So that is a lengthier, much lengthier process, because every single parameter or aspect has to be checked and rechecked again whether the assumptions made are valid in India's case or no. So that is a little time-consuming process, and I think BIS is already working on it, BIS and PESO. So that was the second category, which there was some standard ready, but not much work. I mean, we had to change it to for Indian conditions. And the last category was where we have to actually develop new standards, because none exist anywhere in the world which are comparable. So, as I said, in the first phase, around 100 of those recommendations have been already given to bodies. I'll enumerate them. It's BIS for most of them. Then it is PESO for standards which pertain to particular storage and other standards, which because they control the Explosive Substances Act. They are also given to the Ministry of Road Transport and the Oil Safety Board of India. So these four agencies are roughly responsible for laying down most standards you see in India. We are going to, if you recall, the mission has an empowered group, which is the apex body of the mission, and that does a quarterly review of every quarter. It's planned to meet once on reviewing all aspects of the mission. So it is second. I mean, the first meeting was already had. We had the first meeting in May. Second meeting is either this month or next month, early next month. We are planning to have it. So that will be in that again meeting. We'll have to present a very detailed review of what we achieved in this quarter, especially in all aspects. So detailed review of standards will also be most likely a part of that, at least our presentation. And you would see quite significant progress in terms of the standards being notified by this year end. As you are aware, we are already floated the two schemes, Site 1 and 2. I mean, the two parts of Site for electrolyzers and for hydrogen. So the schemes have been floated, I mean the scheme guidelines, and the tenders have also been floated for those guidelines. So we expect the first plants to be operational in the next 3 years, roughly 2.5 to 3 years. So even for us, it is absolutely imperative that all standards are in place much before the plants come up, so that the producers and the users both have adequate amount of clarity, and we do not have any gap in terms of regulatory action required for standards. So that is our first part. So we work backwards from there. That what is required for industry to essentially, not have anything left to chance, because this is a field where even one accident can sort of ruin the reputation for years to come. Say, be it a vehicle or be it any plant. So appropriate codes and the testing infrastructure. So this is one part, is the laying down the codes. The second part is to lay down an infrastructure which can actually test whether a product matches those standards. As you are aware, even in the world currently, there are very few places where you can actually test the green hydrogen ecosystem, especially electrolyzers or pipes which can take hydrogen or ammonia pipes. Very few places. So the second sort of very related component of standards is testing facilities. The mission has provided sufficient budget, which I think is around 400 crores, if I'm not 400 to 200 crores, if I'm not, I'll just check it, for specifically for this component of testing, certification, and codes. So MNRA will also come out with schemes very soon, maybe in the next 3 or 4 months, for any facility or for any lab to set up testing facilities in India for electrolyzers, all across the value chain. Even for that to happen, they need to know what standards they need to check against. So that is also one crucial aspect of our mission, and without which the mission, because we are sensing that at the rate at which plants are coming up all over the world, there's going to be soon a very huge shortage of testing facilities and unnecessarily long queues just for getting your product tested, which we don't want to see in India. So we need to build the basic capacity to achieve that. So the schemes will come shortly. I have a question in the chat box. Of course, you can keep your questions coming. I'll try to answer them as much as I can. How can the industry actively participate in the process of developing standards? So this is the question. I think the one I said before, the working groups which we have made, they all compose of industry bodies itself. So all the standards which we make are being proposed after thorough consultation with industry and academia both. So if you want to be a part of the process, I suggest you get in touch with either CII or I think it's FICCI, and for the third group for mobility, it is SIAM. So these three are the conveners for these subgroups. So if you want to be a part of the process, you may contact CII, FICCI, and SIAM based upon your expertise, and we'll be happy to hear your inputs. So this was when I said the reports were submitted by these groups. These are only phase 1. We will soon be asking them to start with phase 2, which will identify more standards. These were just the priority ones. Now we need to go and identify an exhaustive standard list, which something we need to keep on doing year after year. It's not a one-time exercise. So we do plan that these working groups will continue their work even after, the mission is completely rolled out. So briefly, I would restrict myself to this. I would like to answer questions more if there are any. And to summarize my address, which is that MNRE is well aware of the importance of standards in setting up the ecosystem for hydrogen. In fact, the working groups were appointed in, I think, May or June last year, even before the mission was approved. Yeah. So we are well aware of the importance of the matter and the time which it takes. And we have taken a reasonably quick action, but that is not going to stop here. We are going to keep on taking the actions. And as I said, the mission also has a budget for setting up facilities for developing standards and also for setting up facilities to test whether the products and the processes match the standards or no. Looking for all your cooperation in times to come for the mission, and very, very big thank you to CEEW for inviting me here. And we hope to keep the association going strong in the coming years. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dr. Chafikar, for your keynote address. All of us are indeed very proud of the targets which have been set in the National Green Hydrogen Mission. We also thank you for highlighting the importance of standards, and we are pleased to note the progress that MNRE has made in this regard. All of us now look forward to the implementation of the National Green Hydrogen Mission. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dr. Chafikar. I would now like to invite my colleague,
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. Excuse me, there are 3 questions. I'll answer them in 2 minutes and then I'll be...
Yes, please.
Yeah. So what great if the point of contact can be shared. You can email it to me. I'll get the contacts for you. Are there going to be any specific considerations, support policies for biomass-based hydrogen? Absolutely, yes. The biomass is an integral part of our green hydrogen system. The mission document mentions it as such, And once the hydrogen definition is out, you will get more clarity on this issue. Another attendee about this is about the definition of green hydrogen. Kindly wait for a few days. It will be notified very shortly. Then we can have more questions on this aspect for the definition. And the third, the last question is, what is the support offered? So we will come out with scheme guidelines. Just we came out with site. We'll have similar guidelines for support for labs, and you can apply accordingly if you're eligible according to those guidelines. So we'll need a couple of months, 2-3 months, to firm up those guidelines. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Chafekar, for answering the questions. I think hydrogen standards is a very hot topic these days, and people have a lot of questions on hydrogen standards. We are also partially trying to answer those questions from a research perspective. And thank you, MNRE, thank you, Dr. Chafekar, for giving us the keynote address. I would now like to invite my colleague and the first author of the report that we are launching today, Pratik Shripati, to make a briefing presentation. Over to you, Pratik.
Thank you, Deepak. Good morning for some of them who's joining from a different time zone, and good evening for the rest of you. So I'll just give you a brief presentation on the insights we gained through our study. Yeah. So the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Sorry.
Minimize the.
Yeah. So the Council on Energy, Environment and Water is one of Asia's leading not-for-profit policy research institutions. The Council is impacting sustainable development at scale with the data, integrated analysis and strategic outreach to explain and change the use, reuse and misuse of resources. We broadly work under 3 themes: transformations, quality of life and enablers. And under transformations, we have teams working under low carbon economy, energy transitions, power markets, industrial sustainability, and sustainable livelihoods. And we also have a team working on issues related to quality of life, like clean air, sustainable water, food systems, cooling and mobility, and enablers such as sustainable finance, technology futures, etc. We also have some special initiatives like the CEEW Center for Energy Finance, Powering Livelihoods, Emerging Economies, and the UP State Office. So we are a multidisciplinary team of about 200 plus spread across the organization, and we have a footprint in about 22 states. So this slide sort of summarizes the gaps in standards for India's hydrogen value chain. I will just take you through each part of the value chain. For hydrogen production, India is particularly well equipped because we already have standards for electrolytic hydrogen production and hydrogen production through fuel processing. We also have standards for gaseous hydrogen storage, but we don't yet have standards on liquid hydrogen storage, hydrogen metal hydride systems, pipeline transport of hydrogen, and maritime hydrogen transport. I also would like to bring to the notice of the audience that the blue standards indicate where we already have standards, and the orange shows the gaps in standards in the hydrogen value chain and also presents options that India can adapt after due diligence. So as you can see, we don't yet have standards on liquid hydrogen storage and for metal hydride, etc., and all of that. And we also fare particularly well for in terms of safety for handling hydrogen and also for leak detection. But we don't have standards on hydrogen refueling stations yet. We also don't have standards for hydrogen mobility applications like hydrogen-based aviation and for railway locomotives. And for fuel cell electric vehicles, again, we also fare particularly well because we already have standards for general vehicle safety, storage of gaseous and liquid hydrogen in fuel tanks and fuel system components. And when it comes to power generation through fuel cells, we don't have standards for stationary, portable, and micro fuel cells. And you can see the options that are available for India to adapt. Yeah. So when it comes to electrolytic hydrogen production, most countries have already adapted a standard, and India also has a standard readily available, which is a derivative of the ISO standard. And this standard covers the PEM, AEM electrolyzers, but does not cover standards for the solid oxide electrolyzer cells. And it does not also specify requirements for performance measurement of electrolyzers. And as you can see on the table on the left, we have listed some standards that are available for India to adapt. And there are standards like UL, which also incorporate standards that are required for SOEC. And another addition is that the updated ISO standard, which is still under development, can be adapted for ending conditions. So the next table on the right compares the standards that are adopted by certain countries like Australia, India, South Korea, United Kingdom, Japan, Canada, Germany, and United States. You can see that most countries already have adapted the ISO standard, some in its original form, but some after modifications. And South Korea does not yet have standards for electrolytic hydrogen production. Yeah, so the table on the left, so in this slide, we are presenting the gaps in standards for hydrogen transport. And as an example, we have focusing on hydrogen pipelines. There are Sorry for the hiccup. So the table on the left, the standards are available for hydrogen pipelines that are developed by ASME, IIT, and the US Department of Transport. Yeah, and this table, if you can see the first one, except United Kingdom and the United States, no other country, including India, has standards for hydrogen pipelines. And the two countries that have the standards, they have adopted the ASME standard. The United States, has, of course, is the original standard developer, and then United Kingdom has modified it according to their needs. And for onboard gaseous storage vessels for transport, most countries have adapted directly or modified adaptation of the ISO standard, which is the primary standard that we have taken for comparison. And the same thing when it goes to liquid hydrogen storage, most countries have adapted the ISO standard. However, India does not have standards for hydrogen storage in reversible metal hydride systems, while other countries that we saw have adapted in a modified form or directly the ISO standard. And it's important to know that we don't have standards at all for liquid organic hydrogen carriers, which I think India should be proactive and to develop its own standards for the same. So this we'll cover gaps in the hydrogen refueling systems. The table shows the available options for hydrogen refueling standards for hydrogen refueling stations, and there are two from ISO for gaseous and liquid. And certain countries like Korea and Australia have modified this ISO standard. And there are, of course, the thing that you can see that Germany has its own standard for hydrogen refueling stations, while there are other standards like from CSA and SAE. And as I already mentioned, that India has yet to develop or adapt standards for hydrogen refueling station, both for gaseous and liquid hydrogen, while other countries, except Germany, have adapted the ISO standard, the prescribed ISO standard. And India, along with Japan and South Korea, does not have standards yet for components regarding hydrogen refueling stations, while other countries have adapted the ISO standard. But it's important to add a rider here that for countries like Japan and South Korea, it's possible that we don't have access to the translation of this standard because they're usually done in local languages. For fuel cell electric vehicles, you can see the options that are available, and India has developed its own original standard for safety of fuel cell electric vehicles based on the AIS format. And you can see that, again, I'd like to emphasize the rider here that Japan, we haven't been able to access the standard that Japan has for fuel cell electric vehicles, but that does not mean it doesn't have it. And India also does not have standards along with South Korea for fuel cell installations for industrial trucks and forklifts, while the rest of them have adapted the IEC or the International Electrotechnical Community standard for industrial trucks and forklifts. And India already has a standard for fuel cell road vehicle, the energy consumption measurement for FCEVs, and we have adapted the ISO standard like the rest of them. So basically, this is a small summary, and we, apart from our study, also involved, finding specific gaps in the standards for the entire value chain. But we also wanted to emphasize that harmonization of standards is very important for a new age fuel like hydrogen, because if we are to achieve the objectives that are laid out in the National Green Hydrogen Mission, like becoming a production hub and also capture the export market, I think it's very important to ensure interoperability across the value chain. And with this, I will stop my presentation and over to you, Deepak.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Pratik. So we are moving on to the next topic, which is a panel discussion. So we already have a very stellar panel to deliberate on the green hydrogen standards in India. I would now like to invite our panelists, Dr. Rajagopal, Mr. Banerjee, and Mr. Rolf, for the panel discussion. And before we actually start with the panel discussion, I'd like to first introduce our panelists to the audience. So Dr. Rajagopal, she is the Director, Center for Excellence in Process Safety and Risk Management for a hydrogen economy at IIT Delhi. She is also a distinguished scientist and former Director General at DRDO. Dr. Rajagopal is also an Indian representative in the RCS task force in the Quad Global Green Hydrogen Partnership, and is a member of the advisory group that basically advises the Empowered Group in India on the National Green Hydrogen Mission. It is a pleasure to have you on the panel, Dr. Rajagopal. I would now like to introduce our second speaker, Mr. Prashant Banerjee. He is the Executive Director at the Society for Indian Automobile Manufacturers and the Society for Automotive Fitness and Environment. He is an alumnus of IIT Bombay and has more than 30 years of experience in the automobile industry. He has extensively worked in different capacities of engineering, development, localization, regulations, and standard formulation roles in multinational companies. On behalf of industry, he represents in various policy, regulations, and standard committees at national and international level. Thank you for taking your time to join us on this panel, Mr. Banerjee. Finally, I'd like to introduce our third speaker, Mr. Rolf. So he is a senior advisor at GIZ for green hydrogen. He currently leads the hydrogen diplomacy initiative in Ukraine, as well as supports the hydrogen task force of the Indian-German Energy Forum. He previously worked with World Bank, IFC, as a practice manager. Mr. Rolf holds a master's degree in industrial economics from Darmstadt University, Germany, and conducted a postgraduate studies at German Development Initiative. It is a pleasure to have you on the panel, Rolf. So I'll first turn to you, Dr. Rajagopal. I don't see you on video, but I hope you can hear me. So as Pratik, pointed out in his presentation, so India, we currently lack standards for hydrogen production through, let's say biomass pyrolysis, for example, storage of liquid hydrogen, hydrogen transport through pipelines, etc. So the report that, we are releasing today points out that existing standards globally, so they can be adapted in India. And, we have made certain recommendations also in that aspect. So what is the process for adapting global standards for Indian conditions, and how, most importantly, how do we ensure that they are adequate to meet the local needs, Dr. Rajagopal?
Yes, I think you brought out a very important point that local conditions, how do we adapt? This is a little challenging. First, of course, we do a review and analysis of the international standards, or the ISO standards or the IEC standards, and then an assessment of the local conditions. We need to have a meticulous assessment of the existing infrastructure, the existing regulations, the climatic aspects, the social awareness levels, the technological readiness, etc. And then, the global standards need to be aligned with the local conditions, and certain modifications may be required for the existing global rules, or we may need to provide additional guidelines. So if we have to write these guidelines and policies, they should be clear, and there should be no room for misinterpretation. And then training sessions need to be conducted. We need to educate the concerned professionals, and also we need to have emergency response training. Then we need to have a compliance review. That means regular audits, surprise audits, etc. And then public awareness programs are very, very important, because information campaigns to make the public aware of the risks and safety measures associated. and also continuous monitoring improvement. And we also need to check adequacy and working, actually. Like Mr. Chapekar mentioned, test and certification facilities are also required. And then getting expert opinion. I think MNRE has already done that work over the last 1 year. These 3 working groups have been working, consisting of experts. And then emergency drills are important. Studying accident reports, because we can learn a lot from past events and accidents. I think that should be, and of course, international collaboration. I think BIS, and they are already members of various international organizations, standard organizations. So this is important. Of course, I think more and more involvement of our internal organizations in these working committees needs to be encouraged, because as of now, the participation is limited. So the Indian viewpoint and adapting international standards is very, very important.
Thank you, Dr. Rajagopal. Now, Mr. Banerjee, I have a question for you from an automobile perspective. So, firstly, how closely are standards linked to commercial use of hydrogen for mobility? So, there is one techno-economic, aspect, and there's one, aspect related to standards. So, how closely are the standards-related aspect linked, and how is CEEW enabling the standardization of fuel cell electric vehicles in India?
Thank you for inviting SIAM in this panel and greetings to everyone from SIAM. It's very important that standards lay the basic foundation for designers to conceptualize the product, and standards also actually ensures the very important aspect of safety, performance, the expectations of customers in an aligned way so that the interoperability is also ensured. So therefore, if you look at safety aspect first, standards are very critical because hydrogen as such is a fuel which is required to be compressed at a very high pressure. And that's first place in India. We have concerns with regards to the less organized way of handling things. So therefore, PESO is consciously taken a call whether 700 bar, how easily they will be allowing it. So currently they have limited 350 bar operation only. So standards from the safety point of view, whether it's a pipeline joints or whether it's a engine utilization or whether it's a fuel cell applications, standards at every realm is critical for us. And that's the reason why Government of India, against these 3 subcommittees, they focused on RCS, regulations, codes and standards. So the entire global standards have been studied, and current standards in India versus the gap analysis beautifully presented in the first slide by Prateek brings out the importance of standards. Standards also talk about what kind of performance we need. So India mobility needs are very unique. You see, there is no 3-wheelers in the world. So we are the largest 3-wheeler manufacturers. So if we have to use, if in L category vehicle, which is actually 80% of our annual sale is L category vehicles. So if we have to use L category vehicles for hydrogen, as a fuel, whether it's a fuel cell or ICE engine, it is a very, very unique experience. So therefore, standards become all the more critical. So one side is safety, another is performance. And then, of course, if we have a different types of fuel cell vehicles available, because India is no longer insulated, it's a global, economy. So therefore, when you have imported vehicles from across the globe, we should have a kind of international harmonization of standards. Interoperability has to be ensured, what we adopt and what is being brought from outside. So therefore, in all the 3 count, safety, performance, and interoperability point of view, for getting the benefit of economy of scale and acceptance of customers of the new technology, standards play a very critical role.
Thank you for your response, Mr. Banerjee. I'll come back to you again. Now, Mr. Rolf, you have been, sort of traveling between India, European Union, etc. So my question to you is, from larger global perspective and, specifically in the European Union. So, how is the hydrogen standards framework taking shape in the EU? And, if you can give some global perspective, and has it increased industry confidence in hydrogen production, transport, storage, and use?
Thank you. First of all, greetings to India, greetings to everybody on the call. Thank you for the invite. Pleased and also be honored to be on this call. I think EU. So the gentleman to your colleague Pratik already gave a nice slide show what the EU is doing and what's not doing. What is very clear, the EU still needs to do a lot on the gas infrastructure. I think we're clear that the repurposing existing gas pipelines to hydrogen is probably the most economic way, and therefore that's where the EU needs to do a lot of stuff. The EU has done a lot already on the fuel cells. So here we're okay. EU is still working on the, let's say, for the heavy vehicles. And I think those are the two issues where I think reality is catching up with what we thought in the past. In the sense that we've previously thought, fuel cells for commercial vehicles will be the main application. I think as we learn more, we understand that hydrogen must be used for hard to decarbonize sectors and possibly also heavy vehicles. I think so mobility will play a role. So therefore, with the standards, I would like to line really, so where will also the applications be? Obviously, gas pipelines will be interesting, although is it really for blending or is it really for pure hydrogen? So probably we need more standards really is also materials. You go from standards, interesting standard is such a, you would think like engineers agree on standards. And if you go to economists, they will give you 10 different definitions. So you have your technical standard. You also have your, let's say, industry standard. So if you just stick to pipelines, are you going to do 20-inch, 50, 12-inch, whatever? How do you do your valves? So irrespective of technical safety issues, you also have questions on how do you make different companies work together? Do you use inches or do you use centimeters, metrics or system? That's just like another issue, which is not a regulable standard, which needs to be resolved internationally. Ms. Rajgopal, I agreed fully with her. She made an interesting comment here on safety. I'm not sure if anybody heard about the accident of the hydrogen fuel cell bus in California 2 weeks ago. Not sure if anybody has. Some hydrogen bus exploded. And this case goes to show, as in most cases of hydrogen, I heard a statistic from David Wenger saying 71% of all hydrogen accidents, nobody knows where the initial spark came from. And so therefore, better analysis of accidents, but actually for me, the critical part, hydrogen leakage detection is probably an area which I don't think globally is being completely missed. And that is a key issue because if you don't know where the leakage comes from, you don't know what to improve on your safety. And finding out better leakage detection mechanisms, but better monitoring is probably a key issue. Another problem with standards, and I'll just stick to standards, is there's some areas which go beyond national competencies, is the maritime sector. And we do know that ammonia can be transported today, and LNG, LPG ships, of the 200 LPG ships that exist, 40 do transport ammonia regularly. But how to use ammonia as a fuel for the powertrain is not resolved yet. And that is like a licensing issue, which lies with the authority of the International Maritime Organization. So there's more examples to show there. Some things India can do, some things will need to work with international bodies.
Thank you, Rob. That was very interesting. Which Rob's comments brings me to my next question, Dr. Rajagopal, which is coming back to India. What are some of the protocols and standards for safe handling of hydrogen, and how can we, most importantly, ensure that it is complied with at every level of the value chain? And again, what are the current mechanism for leak detection of hydrogen in India, and how can it be improved?
So as a previous expert had brought out, safety is essential because we need to assure that public health safety risks are associated with hydrogen are addressed. And therefore, the international standards for safe handling of hydrogen, they have been established by ISO, the TR 15916, which provides the basic considerations for safety and all the characteristics and the issues and what are the guidance. NFPA 2 is another comprehensive document which provides fundamental safeguards. Now in India, we have the IS 15201, which was reaffirmed in 2014, which also tells us about properties and prevention of hazards related to the use of hydrogen. But there are no elaborate codes or standards for safety distances for hydrogen storage, either gaseous or liquid, and for pipelines, except for a few guidelines in the SMPV, that is the static and mobile pressure vessel rules, and the GSR rules. So some of the European Industrial Gas Association, EGA rules for safety distances and separation distances in NFPA 2, NFPA 55, and so on. And also for fire and explosion protection, there are some IEC rules. And then review of the use of Underwriters Laboratory, UL 2075 for hydrogen sensors, as well as CSA and FM. Then we also need to look at hydrogen vent systems. And also we need to have some positive statements on roof above the hydrogen storage systems. Then, so there are some customized solutions also required. And I would strongly propagate the use of 3D CFD modeling techniques and QRA for assessing consequence and risk to arrive at safe separation distances wherever required. And for training purposes, the advocacy of VR training based on, again, input from CFD modeling for operators, for emergency responders, and also for risk communication to decision makers and regulators. We also need to have a good event and accident database where we can learn from past events and accidents so that we can review and adapt. And then a continuous adaptation and updation of regulations and standards based on global developments. So as far as the sensors are concerned, now we have various mechanisms for leak detection, and IS 16253, which is the derivative of 26142, it does talk of hydrogen detection apparatus and its certification. Of course, the most sensitive method is electrochemical sensors, and then gas chromatography, but mostly in lab, that's very expensive. And for explosive LEL safety, we look at catalytic beads. So we can have both portable and fixed gas detectors, and the optimized layout of these detectors is again very important. And again, here CFD modeling can help us. So there are various types of sensors. If somebody is interested, I can tell them about it. But I think generally we have chemical tracers, visual leak detection, acoustic detection, infrared technology, spectroscopic technology, sniffer technologies, and then we have thermal imaging. So we can have a combination or a selection of these depending on the specific use required.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dr. Rajagopal. This is very useful actually for researchers like us. Now, Mr. Banerjee, how can India overcome bottlenecks and regulatory challenges related to permissions for green hydrogen projects, especially for automobile applications, because there are big firms that are trying to go into hydrogen-based mobility applications, buses and trucks, etc. And there are big plans on these aspects as well. So, what are the bottlenecks, and how can we overcome these bottlenecks and regulatory challenges, Mr. Banerjee?
Thank you for the question. It's a very interesting question. Actually, since beginning in 2005, when the National Hydrogen Board was created under Mr. Tata and Professor Kasturi Rangan was there, since then actually MNRE has taken a very proactive approach, and a huge amount of money was given for promoting mobility application solutions with hydrogen in mind. And the Tata fuel cell bus, which was actually with the help of MNRE conceptualized, developed, and tried and tested and run in Gujarat area with available hydrogen in that region from chemical fertilizer companies. So since then, we have been in touch with regards to identifying the bottlenecks. So initially there was a standards related challenges. Of course, we borrowed from ISO and IEC standards, most of them. I was then working for ISO Working Group 4 from India on hydrogen applications. But PESO has always been very proactively supporting, though they are always apprehensive about the safety aspect. So they never permitted trial runs on an open field. So we had to create a special, area and zone in which the trial runs were conducted, and in a very controlled environment, the hydrogen supply was being made. But now there is a larger clarity. So you know that there are some hydrogen stations created in Delhi and IOCL R&D area, and now we are looking for PESO support in terms of both, say for example, type 4 cylinders. Initially they were hesitant, but for hydrogen application, carbon fiber type 4 cylinders are the best suited ones with 700 bar. Normally what I saw recently, the government of India delegation had visited Japan, so we visited Mirai facility as well. So we found that testing is normally done at 900 bar when you have a 700 bar system, so as to be very safe. So with the 700 bar testing, initially it is done at helium, and then subsequently the leak test is done with very precise sensors. So those kind of things are required to be done. But once that is done, regular periodic inspections of the cylinders, because carbon fiber cylinders, if the fibers are cut, then it's a very, very dangerous, potent, threat for explosion. So therefore, those aspect we are very closely working with PESO, and PESO is cognizant of this challenge. So therefore, currently 350 bar is approved, but 700 bar they are a bit cautious. But as regards the other challenge which we have before us is what kind of receptacles we have to use, what kind of common solutions we can identify among different vehicle categories. And then already we have proto vehicles ready, but both fuel cell as well as now ICE has taken up a big leap forward. So there are demonstration vehicles. Currently, you have seen on 6th of February when Honorable Prime Minister launched from IEW Bangalore. The first vehicle was the Reliance Ashok Leyland H2 ICE option of truck. And then we displayed recently in Clean Energy Ministerial in Goa the hydrogen solution on cars. But going forward, we are very clear that there are a number of projects which has been with NTPC and with Tata, with solutions of ICE options also. OEMs are working. So I'm sure that pilot projects, feasibility, trial runs, what is being supported with Government of India. MNRE has taken all the recommendations of gaps which were identified as a bottleneck for promoting the hydrogen mobility application demonstrations. So even in for creating certification validation infrastructure, testing infrastructure, ARI has submitted what all gaps are there. So that gap is being identified so that we are able to do the testing properly, certification properly, and for making hydrogen available of right quality, that effort is also being made. So in all, I feel that there is a very coordinated approach. Quad meetings are also happening from time to time to synergize with learnings of other countries. So I'm sure that we will be able to at least create a base platform where the mobility application related innovation happens. So being a convener of the subgroup 3, it was a mandate to us that we don't have to only focus on automobile applications, but we also have to have a construction equipment, vehicles, as well as we have to focus on locomotive, marine, gensets. So all those, requirements have been taken into account in our report. and we have submitted, and based on that, MNRE has directed the line ministries, whosoever is responsible for notifying the related standards, regulations, and codes. That action has already been taken. So therefore, currently all the innovative mobility application work is possible to be done in India, and we are at a stage where certification and homologation can be done so that the vehicle can run on road. So some of the vehicles are already at a stage of seeking approval to ply in a specific roads so that we can demonstrate hydrogen mobility applications in real life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mr. Banerjee, for your insightful comments. So, coming to you, Mr. Raul, right? I think there's a question also on this aspect. How critical are standards compatibility for developing an interoperable hydrogen ecosystem globally? I think Mr. Banerjee also talked about this aspect. And, what can India learn from global developments, which you sort of talked about in your first comment, and contribute to ensuring harmonization of standards globally? So your opinion on this, Mr. Raul?
Oh, my Lord. Yeah, look, I think the speakers have all said, so we believe we need standards because standards are the prerequisite for actually for commercial application and for replication. Without standards, you have pilot tests. Very simple. So you do need standards. Since the hydrogen luckily has been very safe so far, but is perceived. The Hindenburg accident of 37 is something everybody refers to. And so there's a mismatch between the psychological fear and the reality of actual, let's say, incidents, but still that fear is there. And so we do need, it doesn't matter, it's the perception is there, so we do need to raise the safety issue. Having safety standards, and that's why I think Ms. Rajgopal also agreed with me. It's really about the, she was much more in depth on the fantastic sensors and measurements and all that. I think that needs to be standardized so that accidents are avoided, and if accidents do happen, one can learn from them. India, what can India learn? I mean, obviously, luckily, hydrogen is not a, it's still a lot of it is about pure physics, and physics hold the same laws irrespective of which country. So the law of gravity applies, and hydrogen in every country, and hydrogen is just as the same volumetric density in India as it does in Germany. So that doesn't change. And the properties of hydrogen to embrittle metal also happen everywhere. So India I think, can learn from other countries. I think there's also international exchanges. I was reading there's also an EU report. There's also international groups that are working on the standards. So there's lots of things that we're actually learning. Probably academic level sharing is possible. What was the other question? There were three. I answered two.
Yes, the third one. I think I had two questions on this, Rolf. I think you have answered.
Okay.
Question. Yeah.
I would just like to add on. So we're focusing at the moment very strongly on the technical issues. And like one of the bigger issues, the elephant in the room is the standard or the definition of what is green hydrogen. And that is actually the elephant in the room, because as long as the EU says banking only up to one, as of 2030, banking only for an hour, and India says banking up to 1 month, you have a huge problem in trade because you have very different standards of what is green. The EU has been interestingly produced a new standard on going from green to low carbon. I think there was 65 grams CO2 per kilowatt hour. So we're going from hydrogen to the standards for electricity to produce green hydrogen. And so we can look at hydrogen alone, but sometimes it makes sense to look a bit broader, because unless we know what green hydrogen or what green electricity is, we can't produce green hydrogen.
Yes, that is a very pertinent point, Rolf. So I think Dr. Chafekar alluded to that on the definition of green hydrogen. I think the definition has been formalized. We were a part of the subcommittee there, and we are expecting the release of definition of green hydrogen as well, Rolf. So thank you. So our report is out there. I think I see a few questions, dear sir. Okay, so there is a question. I think the first question was regarding compatibility, etc., which has been answered. There's one question, perhaps Rolf. I think you sort of alluded to this. There has been some accident in recent times. So do we what are the learnings, etc., that we can have from those accidents? So any of the panelists perhaps can take this question. I think Rolf, you alluded to accident in California on this aspect, right?
Yes, so I can talk about the California accident. So look, I don't know the full details. I think it's still being researched, and again, in most cases you don't even know where it starts. What is believed to be the case that there's somehow a fire broke out. The hydrogen safety mechanism supposedly functioned, but the burning still continued. So there is a perception it was a hydrogen fuel cell, but actually safety standards worked. And so if the hydrogen gets released, you don't have an explosion, but the vehicle continued to burn. So that's what I've been told, but it requires more research. That's of course because an individual incident, but which gets blown up in the bigger, because it's just very, the bigger scheme of things is still good.
Agreed. Thank you, Rolf, for your discussion, your inputs here. Our report has been released. It is out there on our website. I have shared the link with everyone. So with this, I'd like to close the session. This has indeed been a very enriching discussion and a steep learning curve for me. I have talked to all of you here who are experts on hydrogen safety. I would like to thank Dr. Prasad Chapekar for his keynote address, and also for taking questions that were there in the chat box. I would also like to thank our panelists, Dr. Rajagopal, Mr. Banerjee, and Mr. Rolf for their time and inputs that they have given during the panel discussion. I would like to thank audience, who have been with us for the past one and a half hours. The report, as I shared, the link is available on our website, and the audience or anybody there, you can always write to us if you have any questions.
LinkedIn also, so we can take it offline.
Okay, so there are some questions on LinkedIn as well, so we'll take them offline. So thank you, everyone. Have a good and relaxing weekend. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.